He had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. He had survived loss, betrayal, and decades of sacrifice. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared Arthur Calloway for the moment he opened his front gate on a stormy October night and found a little girl standing in the rain, soaking wet, shaking, and whispering a name that cracked something open inside his chest that had been sealed shut for years. By the end of the story, his son would lose everything, and a 7-year-old girl with a scar on her arm would inherit it all. The selected hook is option 3. The full script continues from here. He had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. He had survived loss, betrayal, and decades of sacrifice. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared Arthur Calloway for the moment he opened his front gate on a stormy October night and found a little girl standing in the rain, soaking wet, shaking, and whispering a name that cracked something open inside his chest that had been sealed shut for years. By the end of this story, his son would lose everything, and a 7-year-old girl with a scar on her arm would inherit it all. Now, before we get into that night, let me tell you a little something about Arthur, because you need to understand who this man was before you can understand why what he did was so extraordinary. Arthur Calloway was 73 years old, born in a small town in rural Ohio that most people can't find on a map. His father was a mechanic. His mother cleaned houses. They didn't have much, but they had dignity, and they had a rule in that house. You look after your own. No exceptions, no excuses. You look after your own. Arthur carried that rule with him his entire life. He carried it when he left Ohio at 18 with $47 in his pocket and a cardboard suitcase. He carried it when he slept on his cousin's couch in Chicago for 11 months while he worked double shifts at a printing company. He carried it when he started his first business at 26, a small commercial printing operation out of a rented garage, and nearly went bankrupt 3 times in the first 2 years. And he carried it when that small operation eventually became Calloway Group, one of the most respected media and publishing conglomerates in the country, with offices in 11 cities, and a valuation that had crossed the $2 billion mark the previous spring. $2 billion. From $47 in a cardboard suitcase. The man was a legend, but not the kind of legend who put his name on buildings and gave speeches about his own greatness. Arthur was the quiet kind, the kind who showed up early, stayed late, remembered everyone's name, and never once forgot where he came from. He had been married once, to a woman named Eleanor. She had been his partner, his compass, his home. They had built everything together, Eleanor and Arthur, through the lean years and the abundant years, through the seasons of doubt and the seasons of triumph. She had passed away 6 years before this story begins, from a sudden cardiac event that Arthur still couldn't fully accept. Not because he hadn't had time to grieve. He had, but because Eleanor was the kind of person whose absence leaves a hole in the architecture of the world. The house felt different without her. The mornings felt different. Even the light felt different. They had one son, Richard. And this is where the story starts to get complicated. Richard Calloway was 44 years old. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and extraordinarily handsome in the way that certain men are when they've never had to work particularly hard for anything. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, but he had inherited neither of their characters. Where Arthur was humble, Richard was ostentatious. Where Arthur was generous, Richard was transactional. Where Arthur valued substance, Richard was absolutely intoxicated by surface. Richard had joined Calloway Group 13 years earlier, not through any particular talent or effort, but because Arthur had wanted to give him an opportunity, a place to grow, a chance to learn the business from the inside and perhaps absorb some of what made it great. For the first few years, it seemed like it might be working. Richard was sharp when he applied himself. He understood numbers, he had a certain charisma in meetings, and he was good at the performative aspects of leadership. The presentations, the handshakes, the vision statements. But somewhere along the way, Richard had decided that the performance was the point, that looking like a successful person was the same thing as being one. And nowhere was this more apparent than in his marriage to Vanessa. Vanessa Calloway, née Hartwell, was 41 years old. She was beautiful in a way that required about 3 hours of preparation every morning and a team of 4 people to maintain. She was not unintelligent. In fact, she was quite clever in the specific and rather narrow domain of personal brand management. She had built a social media following of 1.2 million people across her various platforms by presenting what she called, and I want you to hear this phrase clearly, an aspirational lifestyle narrative, which, translated from the language of vanity into plain English, means she posted pictures of things that made her life look perfect: the house, the vacations, the dinners, the outfits, the charity events, the curated family moments, all of it staged, lit, filtered, captioned, and scheduled. Richard and Vanessa were, to the outside world, a golden couple, the kind of people who showed up on the covers of regional lifestyle magazines, the kind of people whose holiday parties made the social columns, the kind of people who seem to have everything arranged just so, like a photograph that's been set up so carefully that you forget real life is supposed to be messy and surprising and honest. And they were, in fact, extremely concerned with their image, obsessively concerned, pathologically concerned, in a way that, as you are about to discover, had caused them to do something that decent human beings simply do not do. But we'll get to that. Let me take you to that October night, the night everything changed. It was a Thursday. Arthur remembered it as a Thursday because he had spent most of the afternoon on a call with his board about the quarterly results, and by the time he finally disconnected and walked downstairs to make himself some tea, he was exhausted in that particular way. That comes not from physical effort, but from too many hours of pretending to be patient with people who talk in circles. The rain had started around 4 in the afternoon, and by 8 o'clock it was coming down hard, not a summer shower, a proper autumn storm with gusts that rattled the windows and sheets of rain that turned the garden into a blur of gray and wet. Arthur stood at the kitchen window for a moment with his tea, watching the lights of the city in the distance, thinking about Eleanor. He thought about her often in the evenings. They used to stand at this window together sometimes. Just the two of them. Not even talking. Just standing. He missed that. He missed the comfortable quiet of being with someone who knows you completely. He was about to turn away when he saw it. A shape, small. Near the front gate, at first he thought it was the neighbor's cat, which had a habit of sheltering under the stone wall when it rained, but then the shape moved, and it moved in a way that was distinctly, undeniably human. Small and human, and hunched against the rain. Arthur set down his tea, he put on his coat, he walked to the front door, pulled on his boots, and stepped out into the storm. The gravel driveway was already running with water. The rain hit his shoulders and his hood as he walked toward the gate, squinting through the downpour. And as he got closer, the shape resolved into something that stopped him mid-step. A child, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting on the stone step just outside the iron gate. She was wearing a yellow dress that was completely soaked through. No coat, no jacket, no umbrella. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her head. Her small shoulders were shaking, whether from cold or from crying, it was impossible to tell. And her arms were wrapped around her knees, pulling them close to her chest, in that posture that children adopt when they are trying to make themselves as small as possible, as if they are hoping the world might simply not notice them. Arthur knelt down right there in the rain. He didn't call to her from a distance or shout over the noise of the storm. He just knelt down so he was at her level, and he said quietly and gently, "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you all right?" The girl didn't look up immediately. She stayed still for a moment, and then she slowly raised her head. Her eyes were large and dark brown, rimmed red from crying. Her face was small and delicate with a smear of mud on one cheek. She looked at Arthur with the particular expression that children wear when they have learned through experience to be careful about trusting adults. It was a look of assessment, of wariness, of someone deciding whether or not it was safe. Arthur held her gaze and didn't move. He just stayed there on one knee in the pouring rain, making no sudden moves, keeping his voice soft. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you lost, sweetheart?" The girl looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at the gate, then back at him. Is this the Calloway house? She asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Arthur caught it clearly enough. Precise, careful little voice, like she had rehearsed this. It is, Arthur said. I'm Arthur Calloway. Something shifted in the child's face, a complex expression that Arthur couldn't quite read. Not surprise exactly, more like the arrival of something that had been anticipated, like reaching a destination after a very long journey. My name is Lily, she said, very quietly. Hello, Lily, Arthur said. It's very nice to meet you. Now, can you tell me where you live? I'd like to get you somewhere warm and dry. Can we call your parents? There was a pause, a long one, and then Lily said something that Arthur would later describe as the moment the ground shifted beneath him. She said it so quietly, he almost didn't catch it, and later he would wonder whether she had said it that way on purpose, knowing instinctively that there are some things that need to be received gently. My mom said that if something ever happened, I should find you. She said you were my grandfather. Arthur didn't move. He stayed there, kneeling in the rain, and he felt something happen inside him that he could not immediately name, a kind of seismic shift, the rearrangement of assumptions, the sudden and disorienting sensation of a world reassembling itself around a fact you didn't know existed. His grandfather. Arthur had one son, Richard. Richard was 44 and had been married to Vanessa for 12 years. They had no children. Arthur had asked about it years ago, early in the marriage. Richard had been vague. Vanessa had been even vaguer. Something about timing, about wanting to wait until they were more settled, about not being ready yet. And then the years had passed and the subject had quietly faded, the way subjects do in families where there are things no one particularly wants to examine. Or so Arthur had thought. He looked at this little girl, this small, soaking wet, shivering little girl sitting on his front step in the middle of a storm. He looked at her dark brown eyes and her small, delicate face, and something in him, something below the level of reason, something older than thought, said, yes. Yes, of course. Come inside, Arthur said. His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. Come inside out of the rain. He held out his hand. Lily looked at it for a moment, then she took it. Now, I need you to notice something about that moment, because it's important. The little girl was shaking from cold, she was soaking wet, she had just said something enormous to a complete stranger. And yet she reached out and took his hand, not because she had no other choice, but because something in the way Arthur knelt there, in the rain, without an umbrella, without flinching, without making her feel like a problem to be solved, something in that told her he was safe. Children know these things. They really do. Arthur brought her inside through the side entrance, which was closest. He grabbed a towel from the downstairs bathroom and wrapped it around her shoulders and sat her on the bench in the mudroom. He made her a cup of warm cocoa, which was the only thing he could think of that was both warm and appropriate for a 7-year-old at 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening. He brought it to her in a blue ceramic mug and sat across from her on the bench and waited while she wrapped both hands around it and took the first careful sip. He didn't push her. He didn't fire questions at her. He just waited. And Lily, slowly, haltingly, the way a child does when she is telling a story she has carried for too long, began to talk. Her name was Lily Chen. She was 7 years old. Her mother was a woman named May Chen, who had met Richard Calloway at a conference 8 years ago. They had had a brief relationship. When May discovered she was pregnant, she had told Richard, and Richard had very clearly and very firmly told her that he wanted nothing to do with it. He was engaged to Vanessa at the time. He had an image to protect. He had a life carefully arranged, and there was no room in it for a child from a relationship that had never been intended to be serious. He had offered May money, not as support, as payment for her silence. May had refused the money. She had her own quiet pride, and it ran deep. She was a graphic designer who had built a small but solid freelance business, and she had decided she would raise Lily on her own. She had not pursued Richard for support. She had not gone to Arthur, whom she knew about but had never met. She had simply built a life for herself and her daughter, and they had been, by most measures, genuinely happy. Small apartment, warm home, fierce and tender love between a mother and daughter who only had each other. Arthur listened to all of this without moving, without interrupting, with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes very still. Then Lily got to the part about the scar. She said it matter-of-factly, the way children sometimes describe things that adults would circle around for 20 minutes. "There was a fire in our kitchen," she said, "about 2 years ago. The pan caught fire and I was trying to help my mom and I got burned." She pushed back the sleeve of her dress. On the inside of her left forearm, running from just below the elbow down toward her wrist, was a burn scar. It was fully healed, smooth and pale and slightly raised, maybe 5 centimeters long. It was not disfiguring in any meaningful sense. It was the kind of scar that tells a story without overwhelming the person who carries it. But it was visible, unmistakably visible. Arthur looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Lily's face. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. "It just looks different." "It's part of you," Arthur said simply. "That makes it fine." Lily looked at him with those dark, careful eyes, and something in her expression shifted, very slightly. Not relief exactly, more like recognition. Like she had heard something she had been waiting to hear for a while. She continued, her mother had become ill. Not dramatically, not overnight, but quietly and persistently. A chronic condition that had progressed over the past several months to the point where May was no longer able to work consistently, and the medical bills had begun to pile up in a way that a single freelance income could not sustain. May had been trying to manage it. She was stubborn and private and deeply reluctant to ask for help. But 3 months before that October night, she had done something she had avoided doing for years. She had written a letter to Richard Calloway, not asking for herself. She made that very clear in the letter. She was asking for Lily. She was telling him that his daughter existed, that she was 7 years old, that she was wonderful and bright and deserved better than the uncertainty that was closing in around them. She was giving him the chance, the very simple human chance, to step up. Richard had received the letter. Arthur would later confirm this through his own investigation. And Richard's response had been swift and surgical. He had forwarded the letter to Vanessa. They had discussed it, apparently at some length, over what witnesses later described as a notably calm dinner conversation. And then Richard had written back. He had denied paternity. He had denied any knowledge of or connection to May Chen or any child. He had told her, in carefully lawyered language, that he considered any further contact to be harassment and that he would pursue legal options if she persisted. He had also, and this is the part that still makes my skin tighten when I think about it, he had also mentioned, almost in passing, that even if he were to acknowledge any connection, which he was not, a child with a visible physical difference would be, and I am reading from the actual letter here, inconsistent with the public image that we have carefully cultivated. A child with a visible physical difference would be inconsistent with the public image that they had carefully cultivated. A 7-year-old girl with a scar on her arm was, to Richard and Vanessa Calloway, a branding problem. May had read that letter and said nothing to Lily about it. She had folded it and put it in a drawer and tried to carry on, but she was getting weaker. And about 3 weeks before that October night, May had been hospitalized, serious enough that she couldn't care for Lily herself. She had called her sister, who lived across the country in Seattle and was the closest family she had, and her sister had flown in immediately and taken Lily. But before May had gone to the hospital, she had sat Lily down and told her something. She had told Lily that there was a man named Arthur Calloway, her grandfather, that he lived in a big house at the end of Harrington Drive, that if she ever needed help, real help, the kind her mother could no longer provide, she should find him. She had pressed a folded piece of paper into Lily's hand with the address written on it, and she had said, "He's a good man. Your father is not like him, but your grandfather is a good man." Lily had kept that paper in her pocket for 3 weeks, through the hospital visits, through the sleepless nights at her aunt's temporary rental, through the endless uncertainty of not knowing when her mother would come home or what was going to happen next. She had kept it like a talisman. And that afternoon, while her aunt was at the hospital with May, Lily had taken a bus by herself because she was 7 years old and apparently deeply practical in a way that would have horrified any reasonable adult had they known about it, and she had walked the 6 blocks from the bus stop to Harrington Drive in the rain, and she had sat down on the step outside the gate and waited. Arthur listened to all of this without a single interruption. When Lily finished, he sat very still for a moment. Then he asked very quietly, "Does your aunt know where you are?" "No," Lily said. And then, with the kind of devastating honesty that only children are capable of, she added, "She was very busy. I didn't want to bother her." Arthur nodded slowly. "We're going to call her right now," he said, "so she knows you're safe, and then we're going to figure everything out together, okay?" "Okay," Lily said. She looked at him. "Are you angry?" "At you?" Arthur said. "Not even a little bit." "At them?" she said, and she didn't specify who she meant. She didn't need to, Joe. Arthur was quiet for a moment. "That's a feeling I'll deal with privately," he said. "Right now I'm just focused on you." Lily seemed to accept this. She finished her cocoa. Arthur called Lily's aunt, whose name was Grace, and who answered the phone in a voice full of panic and relief in equal measure when Arthur explained where Lily was and that she was safe and warm and unhurt. Grace arrived at the house 40 minutes later, still in her hospital visiting clothes, her eyes red, and she held Lily for a long time in the hallway, and then stood and looked at Arthur over the top of the child's head, with an expression that was impossible to categorize. It was part gratitude, part exhaustion, part something that looked a lot like the relief of handing an enormous weight to someone strong enough to carry it. "She told you everything?" Grace asked. "She told me enough," Arthur said. Grace nodded. She looked down at Lily and back at Arthur. "May tried to do this alone for a very long time," she said. "She's a proud person." "I understand, Arthur," said. Pride like that comes from somewhere." "Richard sent her a letter," Grace said. And then she stopped, as if she wasn't sure how much to say. "I know about the letter," Arthur said, very quietly. Grace looked at him steadily. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Arthur looked at Lily, who was sitting on the hallway bench with the towel still around her shoulders and her empty cocoa mug on her knee, looking at the 2 adults with those large, watchful eyes. "The right thing," Arthur said, whatever that takes. Now, what did the right thing actually mean to Arthur Calloway in that moment? Because this is where the story really starts, and I need you to understand the scale of what Arthur was about to undertake. In the days following that October night, Arthur moved very deliberately. Not impulsively, not emotionally. Deliberately. He was 73 years old, and he had been in enough high-stakes situations to know that a righteous rage without strategy is just noise. He had learned, over 5 decades of building something real, that the most effective kind of action is the kind that is quiet, thorough, and irreversible by the time anyone realizes what's happening. Step 1 was May. Arthur had Grace take him to the hospital the very next morning. He sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes, while the medical team confirmed he was there, at Lily's request, and then he was shown to May's room. He had expected to feel awkward. He hadn't expected to feel so immediately at ease. May Chen was 40 years old, lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a book on her chest and the remains of a breakfast tray beside her. She was thin, clearly tired, and visibly uncomfortable with being in a position of vulnerability. She had her daughter's eyes. Or rather, Lily had her mother's eyes. Dark, careful, evaluating. Arthur had introduced himself simply. "I'm Arthur Calloway," he said. "I believe my son is Lily's father. I'm very sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. And I'm sorrier still that we haven't met sooner." May had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had set down her book. "She found you," she said. It wasn't really a question. "She did," Arthur said. "She's a remarkable child." "She is," May agreed, and something in her face shifted, some carefully maintained structure, and her eyes filled briefly with tears that she immediately and very firmly blinked back. She was her daughter's mother in that way, too. They talked for almost 2 hours. Arthur learned the full story of May and Richard's relationship, which had lasted about 4 months and had been by May's account, presented to her as something meaningful before it became apparent that Richard did not really do meaningful. He was charming and attentive right up until the moment inconvenience appeared on the horizon, at which point he became cold and efficient in a way that was genuinely startling. Arthur learned about Lily's first years, about the fire, about May's illness, which was a condition affecting her heart, treatable but expensive and requiring ongoing management, about the letter she had written to Richard and the response she had received. She showed Arthur the letter. He read it carefully in its entirety and handed it back to her without comment, though the muscle in his jaw was working hard the whole time. And then Arthur told May what he intended to do. He was going to take care of Lily's financial needs immediately and permanently. He was going to ensure that May had access to the best medical care available at his complete expense. He was going to pursue, through legal channels, formal recognition of Lily as his granddaughter, and if possible, formal legal guardianship or adoption, so that Lily had the security of a defined family structure and a financial future that could not be threatened by the volatility of May's health. He said all of this quietly and carefully, and without any performative flourish. He was not trying to be a hero in front of May. He was telling her his plan because she deserved to know it and because her input mattered. May listened to everything. She was quiet for a long time when he finished. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because she's my granddaughter," Arthur said. "Because your situation is partly the consequence of my son's character, which I shaped or failed to shape, and because my parents raised me to look after my own, no exceptions." May looked out the window for a moment. Then she looked back at Arthur. "She's happy with Grace," she said. She's safe. I just need to get better so I can take her back. I'm not looking for a replacement." "Of course not," Arthur said. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm trying to make sure Lily has a grandfather, which she should have had from the beginning." There was another silence, and then May said, "You're nothing like him." "No," Arthur said simply. "I'm not." He meant it as a matter of fact, not as a compliment to himself, and May received it exactly that way. In the weeks that followed that first conversation, Arthur retained the best family law practice in the city. Not the flashiest one, the most thorough one. He engaged a team of 4 lawyers led by a formidable woman named Margaret Howell, who had been doing family law for 31 years and had a reputation for being, as she herself described it, legally immovable once she decided a case was right. Arthur sat across from Margaret in her office and told her what he needed. He needed formal establishment of paternity for Richard Calloway. He needed legal recognition of Lily as a member of the Calloway family. He needed a guardianship arrangement that gave Arthur parental authority while May was incapacitated, and that could transition back to May as her health improved. And further down the line, he wanted to know what adoption would require and what it would look like. Margaret listened and took notes in her precise, small handwriting and asked clarifying questions without any emotional reaction whatsoever. This was one of the things Arthur liked about her immediately. She was not in the business of performing feelings. She was in the business of achieving outcomes. "Does Richard Calloway know any of this is happening?" Margaret asked. "Not yet," Arthur said. "Do you intend to tell him?" "When it's legally unnecessary to do so," Arthur said. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. "Smart," she said, and she smiled, just briefly. "Let's get to work." The paternity question was the first one to be resolved. Richard had been very confident in his denial, which was a confidence based on the assumption that May didn't have the resources to pursue it. She didn't, but Arthur did. A genetic test was arranged through the proper legal channels, which required Richard's participation, and here is where Richard made his second significant miscalculation. His first had been thinking that May was alone. His second was thinking that Arthur didn't know what was happening. When Richard received the legal paperwork requesting a court-ordered DNA test, he had called Arthur immediately, furious, spluttering, using the word harassment in the way that people use it when they mean inconvenience. Arthur had listened to the call without raising his voice. This was a skill he had developed over 50 years, the ability to remain completely calm in the face of another person's fire. It was, frankly, one of the most powerful things about him. "Dad, what is this?" Richard demanded. Some woman I met at a conference years ago is claiming I have a child with her? This is insane. You know this is insane. I know it's being handled legally and properly, Arthur said. So let the process work. You should be backing me up here, Richard said. You should be shutting this down. I'm staying out of it until there's something definitive, Arthur said, which was not technically untrue. He was staying out of it in the sense that he was operating entirely in the background, definitively and comprehensively. Richard took the test. Richard's lawyers told him to take it because refusing would create far worse legal problems. The results came back in 12 days. 99.98% probability of paternity. Richard Calloway was Lily Chen's biological father. Richard called again when the results arrived. This time the fury had a different quality. Less bluster, more calculation. This doesn't mean anything practically, he said. A biological connection doesn't automatically create legal obligations in the way she's probably hoping for, and it certainly doesn't. Richard, Arthur said, very quietly, very calmly. Richard stopped. I know about Lily, Arthur said. I know about the letter May sent you. I know what you wrote back. I know about the scar. I know all of it. A silence. Dad? We'll talk, Arthur said, but not today. I need you to understand something clearly first. This conversation is not about you explaining yourself to me. There is no explanation that will be adequate. I simply want you to know that I know, and that I'm handling things. What does that mean, Richard said. What are you handling? The right thing, Arthur said. Same phrase he had used with Grace. And he hung up. Now, while the legal machinery was grinding forward, Arthur was also doing something else. He was getting to know Lily. This was not part of a strategy. This was simply what happened when you bring a 7-year-old girl into your orbit and she turns out to be one of the most interesting people you have ever met. Lily spent weekends at the Calloway mansion while May was still in the hospital, with Grace's grateful blessing. And those weekends were, for Arthur, the most genuinely pleasant time he had experienced in several years. Lily was serious and curious and funny in a dry, unexpected way. She liked to read, she liked mathematics, she liked building things out of whatever materials were available, and Arthur had discovered this the second weekend she visited, when he came downstairs on a Saturday morning to find she had constructed an elaborate structure out of his hardcover books and some kitchen utensils that she informed him was a suspension bridge in miniature. It was structurally actually quite sound. She was also, beneath the watchfulness, beneath the careful self-containment that her difficult months had built around her, a child who wanted desperately to be safe, to be wanted, to be simply okay. Arthur saw this clearly, and it made him feel something he hadn't felt in 6 years: purpose. The particular, grounding, clarifying kind of purpose that comes from having someone who needs you. He showed her the garden. He taught her how to play chess, which she picked up with an ease that surprised him and then decisively beat him with on their 4th attempt, which surprised him even more and delighted him absolutely. He told her about Eleanor. He showed her photographs. He told her that Eleanor had loved gardens and had planted every rose in the backyard herself, one by one, over a period of 12 years. Lily had listened very solemnly and then said, "She sounds like the kind of person who finishes what she starts." And Arthur had had to look away for a moment. He told her about Ohio, about the garage where his first business had started, about the cardboard suitcase. He told her these things not to be instructive, but because she asked, and he found that with Lily, he didn't feel the need to perform. He could just be an old man telling a child about his life. It was remarkably comfortable. Lily told him things too, about her mother, about her school, where she had one best friend named Priya who loved dinosaurs, about the fire, which she described with a surprising lack of drama. The pan caught, the smoke alarm went off, she had grabbed a cloth and tried to reach the handle the way her mother always did, and the cloth slipped. She had cried, she said, not from the pain, which was very bad, but because she had scared her mother, who had turned white as paper and been shaking for an hour afterward. She blamed herself, Lily said. But it wasn't her fault? No, Arthur said, and it wasn't. It wasn't mine either, Lily said, very matter-of-factly. I was trying to help. Exactly right, Arthur said. They were sitting in the garden when she said this. It was a Saturday afternoon in early November, cold but bright, and Lily was wearing a bright red coat that Arthur had bought her because she had arrived for the second visit in the same thin yellow dress, and he had simply, quietly, and without making it a production, taken her shopping on Friday afternoon. She had picked the red coat herself without hesitation and put it on in the store and turned and looked at her reflection in the mirror with a small, private expression of satisfaction. "Does the scar bother you?" Arthur asked. "No, not physically. I mean, does it bother you that people can see it?" Lily thought about this carefully before answering. "It used to," she said. "Some kids at school said things, and then there were some grown-ups who looked at it in a way that made me feel like something was wrong with me." She paused. "My mom told me that the scar is proof I'm brave," she said. "That brave people have marks because they do things. And she said that the people who try to make you feel bad about marks like that are usually people who've never actually done anything." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Your mother," he said, "is a remarkable woman." "I know," Lily said, simply and completely. Now, while Arthur was having these Saturday afternoons and learning to lose gracefully at chess and buying red coats and gradually, irreversibly, falling in love with his granddaughter in the specific and overwhelming way that grandparents do, the legal situation was advancing with remarkable speed. Margaret Howell turned out to be exactly as formidable as advertised. Within 6 weeks of Arthur engaging her, she had formal paternity established, temporary legal guardianship of Lily assigned to Arthur pending May's recovery, and had filed the initial paperwork for what would eventually become a formal adoption proceeding. Richard's lawyers had attempted to slow every single step of this process and had failed at every single step because Arthur had resources they were not expecting, and Margaret had preparation they were not equipped for. Richard was furious. He called his father repeatedly. He arrived at the mansion unannounced on 2 occasions, which resulted in 2 conversations that were, in Arthur's words to Margaret afterward, clarifying. In the first conversation, Richard demanded to know why Arthur was doing this. He said, and I want you to hear this clearly, he said that Lily was not part of their family, and that formalizing any connection to her would create significant personal and professional complications. He said that Vanessa was deeply upset. He said that their brand, their actual word, their brand was built on a specific image, and that this situation threatened to destabilize things they had worked very hard to construct. Arthur listened to all of this, and then he asked one question, one single question. He said, Have you ever met her?" Richard blinked. "What?" "Have you ever met Lily?" Arthur said. "Your daughter? Have you ever been in the same room as her? Have you ever heard her voice or looked at her face?" Richard was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That's not really the point, Dad." "That is exactly the point," Arthur said. That is the entire point. Get out of my house." The second unannounced visit included Vanessa. This one was more theatrical. Vanessa was a woman who knew how to make an entrance and how to deploy emotion as a strategic tool, and she arrived with a careful combination of wounded dignity and quiet menace. She spoke about her own feelings at length. She spoke about the unfairness of the situation. She spoke about how hard she and Richard had worked. She said several things that were phrased as concern for the family, but were quite transparently about her own anxiety about public perception. At one point she mentioned the scar. She didn't frame it cruelly exactly. She was too smart for that, especially with Arthur watching her with those steady, unimpressed eyes. But she said something about how complicated it would be to integrate a child with that kind of visible history into the life we've built. And she spoke about how social media followers had certain expectations of authenticity and visual consistency, and that introducing a new family member with, and here she used the word thoughtfully, a distinctive appearance would require, in her words, very careful narrative management. Arthur let her finish. He gave her the full silence that follows when someone has said something they cannot take back. And then he said, in a voice so quiet and so flat that Vanessa later described it to Richard as the most frightening thing she had ever heard from another human being, he said, "You referred to my granddaughter as a narrative management challenge. In my house? To my face. I want you to think very carefully about what you just said and what it means, and then I want you to leave." Vanessa left. Richard left. And Arthur went upstairs to his study, sat down in the chair behind his desk and spent a long time very still. He was not raging, he was not weeping, he was calculating. He was the 73-year-old son of a mechanic from Ohio who had built $2 billion from $47 in a suitcase, and he was doing what he did best. He was deciding what to do next, and he was deciding it completely. Now, I have to tell you about the company, because you need to understand what was at stake before you can appreciate the full architecture of what Arthur was about to do. Calloway Group had been built over 40 years. Its current portfolio included 3 major publishing imprints, 2 regional media networks, a digital content platform with 11 million monthly users, and a consulting division that worked with some of the biggest brands in the country. The company had approximately 3,400 employees across its various divisions. It had won industry awards. It had survived 2 recessions and a complete digital disruption of its core business by adapting faster than its competitors. Arthur had stepped back from the day-to-day operations 5 years earlier, moving into the role of chairman of the board. Day-to-day operations had been passed to Richard, who carried the title of president and chief executive. Richard was, in the estimation of most of the board, adequate at the job. Not inspired, not transformational, but adequate. He was good at the visible parts, the public appearances, the investor presentations, the industry conferences. He was less good at the invisible parts, the long-term strategy, the talent cultivation, the quiet daily decisions that determine whether a company stays alive or slowly stops being relevant. Several board members had private concerns they had not yet voiced publicly. Arthur had not stepped back from ownership. He had stepped back from management. There is a difference that matters enormously. He still held the controlling interest in the company. His stake was 58% of voting shares. He had not transferred ownership to Richard. He had transferred authority. There is a legal and financial distinction between those two things, and it is a distinction that Richard had perhaps not paid sufficient attention to. Arthur had been very aware of it. In the weeks following his second conversation with Richard and Vanessa, Arthur went back to his lawyers. Not just Margaret, he also brought in his corporate counsel team, led by a man named David Park, who had been advising Arthur on corporate matters for 22 years, and who was, by temperament, almost exactly like Arthur. Precise, calm, and capable of moving very quickly when the situation required it. Arthur told David everything. David listened without expression, which Arthur had always appreciated about him. "What do you need from me, Swap?" David asked when Arthur finished. "I need to know what it would take to remove Richard from his position as CEO," Arthur said. "Cleanly, legally, immediately." David was quiet for a moment. "You hold 58% of the vote," Eva said. "You can call a special general meeting of the board with proper notice. At that meeting, with a majority vote of the board and your shareholder authority, you can remove him from his executive role. The voting shares you hold give you effective control." "What's the notice period?" 14 days under the corporate charter, David said. "And there's nothing he can do to stop it?" "If you own 58% of the voting shares and you call the meeting, the most he can do is argue," David said. "He can threaten, he can go to a minority shareholder, he can make noise, but he cannot stop the outcome." "Good," Arthur said. "Can I ask what triggered this?" David said. He had worked with Arthur for 22 years. He earned the question. Arthur told him about Lily. He told him about the letter. He told him what Richard and Vanessa had said in his living room. He told him about the word brand. David Park, who had seen a great deal in 22 years of corporate law, sat quietly for a moment after Arthur finished. Then he said, "I'll have the necessary documentation ready within the week." "One more thing," Arthur said. "The gala." David looked at him. "Richard and Vanessa," Arthur said, are hosting a charity gala in 3 weeks. Black tie, 400 guests, significant media presence. It's their annual event. They use it to project a particular image, corporate partners, social connections, press coverage. David was starting to understand where this was going. He nodded slowly. "I want to call the board meeting," Arthur said, "for the day of the gala." David blinked. "You want to convene a special board meeting on the day of their charity event?" "I want to convene it at the venue of their charity event," Arthur said. "After the formal dinner, during the reception." David stared at him. "Is that possible under the charter?" Arthur asked. David thought for a moment. Board meetings can technically be held at any suitable venue with proper notice, he said slowly. The charter doesn't specify a location requirement, as long as all board members are formally notified and have the opportunity to attend. And if I notify them all properly, 14 days in advance, of a board meeting to be convened at the Meridian Grand Hotel at 9 p.m. on the evening of November the 26th, then that's a valid meeting, David said. He was now wearing a very small, very controlled smile that he was clearly working to suppress. That's a legally valid meeting. Excellent, Arthur said. Let's build the documentation. Now? November the 26th. I need to set the scene for you properly because it matters. The Meridian Grand Hotel was one of the most prestigious event venues in the city. Richard and Vanessa had been hosting their annual charity gala there for 5 consecutive years. It was, by all accounts, an extraordinary event. The theme this year was family legacy. I'll let that sink in for a moment. The theme of Richard and Vanessa Calloway's charity gala, in the year they had legally denied the existence of their own daughter, was family legacy. The event was black tie. 400 guests, drawn from the top tier of the city's business, media, and social communities. There were tables at $25,000 a seat. There were corporate sponsors from 4 of Callaway Group's biggest business partners. There was a live auction with items donated by luxury brands, travel companies, and artists. There was a full press contingent, including photographers from 3 regional publications and a crew from a local television network that covered the city's social and business events. And Vanessa had arranged, as she always did, for a prominent social media presence, designated photographers capturing content for her various platforms, which would go out in a carefully timed sequence throughout the evening and the following morning to maximize engagement and reinforce, as she described it in her planning notes that Arthur had subsequently obtained through certain channels, the Calloway family's commitment to community, legacy, and values. Family legacy. Community. Values. Richard and Vanessa had been preparing for this event for 4 months. They had a seating plan, a running order, a catering menu, a florals brief, a lighting design, a social media calendar, and 3 outfit changes planned for Vanessa. They had arranged for their photos to be taken at the entrance, at the dinner table, at the podium, at the auction. They had written and rehearsed Richard's speech, in which he planned to speak about the importance of giving back and the power of family as the bedrock of everything meaningful in life. They had not anticipated Arthur. 14 days before the event, every member of the Callaway Group Board of Directors received a formal, impeccably drafted notice of a special general meeting to be convened at 9 p.m. on November the 26th at the Meridian Grand Hotel. The notice was sent by Arthur's corporate counsel in accordance with the charter. It included a formal agenda. The agenda listed, among other items, a vote on the continued tenure of Richard Calloway as president and chief executive officer. Richard received his copy at 10:17 a.m. He was in a meeting with Vanessa and their event planner at the time, reviewing the seating chart. His assistant had forwarded it to his phone, and he had glanced at it and then read it again, and then gone very still, in a way that Vanessa later said made her feel cold, even though she didn't know yet what she was looking at. The phone call started within the hour. Richard called Arthur. Arthur did not answer. Richard called David Park. David Park was legitimately not available. Richard called Margaret Howell's office by mistake, having looked up the wrong number in his agitation, and spoke to her assistant for 30 seconds before realizing his error and hanging up. He called his own lawyers. They told him very carefully that there was no legal mechanism to prevent the meeting from being held. His father held 58% of the voting shares. The charter permitted special meetings with 14 days' notice. The notice had been given properly. The meeting was happening. Richard called Arthur again. This time Arthur answered. "Dad?" Richard's voice was tight and controlled, the way his voice got when he was very afraid. "What are you doing?" "Exercising my rights as a majority shareholder," Arthur said. "At our gala? You're going to do this at our gala? Do you have any idea how this will look?" "I have a very clear idea of how it will look," Arthur said. That's rather the point." "I will fight this," Richard said. "I have lawyers. I have board relationships. I have—" "Richard," Arthur said, that same quiet tone, that flat, final quality. You have the positions you have because I gave them to you. You have the relationships you have because people respect my name. You have the life you have because your mother and I built something from nothing and handed it to you like a gift, and you decided the gift came with no obligations. I'm correcting that assumption. In 14 days. Silence. I know what you did to that little girl, Arthur said. I know what you wrote in that letter. I know what Vanessa said to me in my own house. And I know that at this exact moment, there are 400 people planning to attend an event called Family Legacy that you are hosting while your 7-year-old daughter has been sitting in hospitals and bus stations and rainstorms while you posted pictures of your kitchen renovation. He let that land. 14 days, Arthur said, and he ended the call. Richard did not call back. Now, in those 14 days, several things happened in parallel, and I want you to understand all of them, because they all matter. Richard, to his credit, or perhaps to his discredit, depending on how you look at it, did not give up. He spent those 2 weeks working his board relationships with considerable energy. He took each board member to lunch or dinner individually. He made his case. He said that Arthur was acting emotionally, that the personal situation had clouded his judgment, that the company's stability required leadership continuity, that removing him now would send a damaging signal to the market. Some board members were sympathetic, not to Richard personally, but to the argument about stability. Arthur had anticipated this. He had also made calls. He had also had conversations. And his conversations were different from Richard's in a fundamental way. Richard's conversations were about what was good for Richard framed as what was good for the company. Arthur's conversations were about what was actually good for the company, substantiated with 3 years of performance data, strategic analysis, and a very clear-eyed assessment of where Calloway Group needed to go in the next decade and whether Richard was capable of taking it there. The data was not kind to Richard. His division's growth had been 3.2% on average over his tenure. The industry average for comparable companies was 7.1%. 3 of the company's most senior creative leaders had left under Richard's management and gone to competitors. 2 major partnership opportunities had been declined by Richard's team, on grounds that Arthur's analysis showed were based on short-term optics rather than long-term value. Arthur also presented what he called the leadership transition plan. He had identified, with David Park's help, an interim CEO candidate, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had been Chief Operating Officer of Calloway Group for 6 years and was, by the unanimous assessment of everyone who worked with her, the most competent executive in the building. Sandra had been passed over for the top role when Richard was appointed. She had stayed anyway because she loved the company and believed in its mission, and she had spent 6 years making Richard look better than he actually was. In the process, Arthur had spoken to Sandra privately. 3 weeks before the board meeting, he had told her what he was planning. He had asked her if she would accept the role of interim CEO, pending a full board selection process. Sandra had looked at him steadily for a long moment, and then she had said, "I've been waiting 6 years for someone to ask me that question." "I know," Arthur said. "I'm sorry it took this long." Meanwhile, Margaret Howell had been completing the adoption paperwork. May, who was recovering steadily under the care of medical specialists that Arthur had arranged, had given her full informed consent for the process. The arrangement they had agreed to was not one that removed May from Lily's life. It was one that gave Lily 2 things simultaneously: her mother, who would always be her mother, and a grandfather who was formally, legally, irrevocably her family. On November the 20th, 6 days before the gala, a judge in family court signed the final order. Lily Chen became, by the full force of law, Lily Chen Calloway. She was the legal granddaughter of Arthur Calloway. She was, in formal terms, a member of the family and a beneficiary of Arthur's estate. Arthur had already updated his estate documents 2 weeks prior, working with his estate planning attorneys. His will, previously structured to leave the bulk of his estate and his controlling interest in Calloway Group to Richard, had been completely rewritten. The new will was precise and deliberate. Richard's inheritance was not eliminated entirely. Arthur was not a vindictive man, and he believed in clean legal structures that couldn't be easily contested. Richard would receive a defined settlement, enough to live on, enough to rebuild if he chose to, but structured in a trust with conditions and without any voting interest in the company. The controlling 58% shareholding of Calloway Group, along with the primary personal assets, the mansion, the investment portfolio, the trusts, would go to Lily, held in a properly structured trust until she was 25, managed by a board of trustees that included Margaret Howell, David Park, Sandra Okafor, and May Chen. $2 billion. From a mechanic's son in Ohio, to a 7-year-old girl with a scar on her arm, and a red coat and a suspension bridge built out of hardcover books. Arthur told Lily about the gala on the afternoon of November the 24th. He told her carefully and clearly, as he always did, without condescension or excessive simplification. He sat across from her in the library where she was reading, and he explained that they were going to attend a party in 2 evenings, that there would be a lot of people there, that some of them would be surprised to see Lily, that it might feel a little intense, and that she didn't have to come if she didn't want to, that it was entirely her choice. Lily had listened to all of this very carefully. Then she asked, "Will he be there?" Arthur understood immediately who she meant. "Yes," he said. Lily thought about this for a moment. "Will it make things better for other kids like me?" she asked. "Kids whose parents pretend they don't exist?" Arthur was quiet. "I don't know if it will directly help other children," he said honestly. "But it will be public, and sometimes when things like this are public, they make people think about how they treat children." Lily nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." "You're sure?" "Yes," she said. And then she looked at him with those dark eyes. "Do I get to wear the red coat?" Arthur smiled. It was the kind of smile that reaches everything. "You can wear whatever you like, yeah," he said. She thought about it. "I want a proper dress," she said, "yeah, but a red one to match the coat." "Then we'll find one," Arthur said. He was, at that moment, entirely convinced that Lily Chen Calloway was one of the finest people he had ever met. Now, November the 26th. Let me take you to the Meridian Grand Hotel at 7 p.m. The event has started. The entrance hall is extraordinary. White flowers, warm lighting, a string quartet. Guests are arriving in black cars and expensive coats, and the particular combination of ease and performance that very wealthy people have at events like this. Richard and Vanessa are at the entrance, greeting guests. They look magnificent. That is the honest truth, and it matters for what comes next. Richard in a perfectly tailored dark suit, Vanessa in a floor-length gown of deep blue that photographs beautifully. They are smiling with the practiced warmth of people who have done this many times. They are kissing cheeks and clasping hands and saying all the right things. The photographers are clicking, and the event is going exactly as planned. Vanessa is wearing, as always, a small wireless earpiece connected to her social media coordinator, who is stationed in a side room with a laptop and a posting schedule. The first photographs have already been uploaded. The venue, the flowers, the couple at the entrance. The caption reads, "An evening in honor of family legacy and the values that bind us together." 47,000 likes in the first 2 hours. Vanessa's team has already flagged it as performing above benchmark. The dinner is served at 8. Richard's speech is scheduled for 8:45. He takes the podium, looking confident, looking like the man who has everything, and he speaks about generosity and legacy, and the responsibility of success, and the importance of family as the foundation of everything meaningful in life. He is good at this. I told you he was good at the visible parts. The speech is polished. The audience applauds at the right moments. Several people at nearby tables lean to each other and say variations of "very impressive young man." Vanessa watches from her seat with a small smile. The evening is going perfectly. Whatever Arthur might have threatened, whatever legal maneuvering might be happening in some parallel world, tonight is intact, tonight is theirs, and then at 9 p.m. the doors at the back of the ballroom open. Arthur Calloway walks in. He is wearing a dark suit that is impeccably cut and completely unshowy. He is not making an entrance in the theatrical sense. He walks in with the quiet steadiness of a man who has been walking into rooms for 73 years and has never felt the need to perform. Several people recognize him immediately. Arthur Calloway, the founder of Calloway Group, attending his son's gala, which he had never done before in 5 years of the event. But the people who see Arthur don't immediately look at Arthur, because walking beside him, with her small hand in his, is a little girl in a red dress, 7 years old, dark hair, dark eyes, perfectly straight. looking at the room with those careful, watchful eyes. On her left arm, visible because the dress is short-sleeved, is a scar that tells a story. The room doesn't immediately understand what it's seeing, but it feels that something has shifted, the way you feel a change in air pressure before you can explain it. Arthur walks to the center of the room. He doesn't look at Richard, he doesn't look at Vanessa. He looks at the room as a whole, and when he reaches the space just in front of the stage, he stops. David Park is already there, at a table that has been quietly set up with documents and a presentation screen. Margaret Howell is there. Sandra Okafor is there, composed and still. 4 other board members are there, in their formal evening wear, seated around the table with the quiet gravity of people who have come to do something definitive. Richard sees his father. He sees Lily. The color drains from his face in a way that is visible from across the room. Vanessa, at the table beside the stage, goes completely still. Her hand holding a champagne glass doesn't move. The smile is still on her face, technically, but it has stopped being connected to anything behind it. Arthur takes the small wireless microphone from the event coordinator, who hands it over with the stunned compliance of someone who has absolutely no idea what to do, and correctly deduces that not cooperating would be a mistake. Arthur speaks. He doesn't shout. He doesn't perform. He simply speaks into the microphone in the same voice he uses for everything. Clear, direct, unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Arthur Calloway. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Calloway Group, and I need approximately 20 minutes of your time for a board meeting that has been formally convened here this evening under the company charter, with all proper notices having been served 14 days ago to all relevant parties." A murmur moves through the room. 400 people processing something unexpected. "I will also," Arthur continues, "be making a brief personal statement before we proceed to the formal business, because these two matters are connected, and I believe the people in this room who have come here tonight in support of the stated values of this event deserve to understand that connection." He looks at Richard. For the first time since walking in, he looks at his son. Richard's face is doing something that 400 people are watching very carefully, and none of them like what they see. "This child," Arthur says, and he places his free hand gently on Lily's shoulder, while her small hand remains in his, "is Lily Chen Calloway. She is 7 years old. She is my granddaughter. She is also the daughter of Richard Calloway, whose name you will see on the program this evening as the host of this fundraiser for Family Legacy." The silence is absolute. 400 people have stopped moving. The photographers, to their credit, or to Vanessa's everlasting horror, continue to photograph. "Lily has been alive for 7 years," Arthur says. "She has never had a birthday card from her father. She has never met him. She has a burn scar on her left arm from a kitchen accident when she was 5 years old. 2 months ago, her mother became seriously ill and wrote to Richard asking for help. Not for herself, for Lily. And Richard responded in writing, which I have copies of for anyone who would like to review them, that he considered any further contact to be harassment. He also stated in that same letter that even if he were to acknowledge a connection, which he explicitly denied, a child with a visible physical difference would be, and I am quoting directly, inconsistent with the public image they had carefully cultivated. He pauses. Let the quote land. Let it sit in the room and be absorbed by 400 people who came here tonight to celebrate family legacy. "I found Lily sitting outside my gate in the rain," Arthur says. "She had taken a bus across the city by herself because her mother had told her that if she ever needed help, she should find me. She was soaking wet and shaking, and she asked me if I was Arthur Calloway. And when I said yes, she told me she was my granddaughter." His voice is completely steady. Not because he isn't feeling anything, but because he is 73 years old and he has learned that the things that matter most deserve the steadiest voice you can give them. "She was," he says. "She is. She is formally and legally my granddaughter, as of 6 days ago. The court order is a matter of public record." He turns slightly to address the board table where David Park has the presentation on screen and the formal documentation ready. "The formal business of this special general meeting is as follows. I am exercising my authority as majority shareholder, holding 58% of the voting shares of Calloway Group, to call a vote on the tenure of Richard Calloway as President and Chief Executive Officer. I am proposing his immediate removal from that position. I am further proposing the appointment of Sandra Okafor as Interim Chief Executive. Effective tomorrow morning, I have provided the formal documentation to all board members, and it is being made available to the Corporate Secretary now. David stands and begins distributing the documents. Board members open envelopes. Richard has not moved. He is still standing near the stage. Vanessa has set down her champagne glass and is looking at Arthur with an expression that is not readable from most angles in the room, but that Arthur can read perfectly clearly from where he stands. It is the expression of someone who has realized too late that they catastrophically underestimated the person across from them. The vote takes 11 minutes. 4 board members for the motion, 2 against, 1 abstention. The mathematical result was never really in doubt, given Arthur's 58%, but the fact that 4 of the 6 independent board members vote in support makes the outcome something more than just an owner overriding a son. It is a verdict, a considered informed verdict by people who have seen the evidence and made a judgment. Sandra Okafor accepts the appointment with a brief professional statement. She thanks Arthur. She thanks the board. She says she is honored and committed and ready. She has the manner of someone who has been ready for 6 years. Richard says nothing during the formal process. He stands there and receives it all. And whatever you might think of Richard Calloway, whatever judgment you are forming right now, I want to tell you that in those 11 minutes, he did one thing right. He didn't make a scene. He didn't shout or threaten or create a spectacle. He stood there and he took it. And I think somewhere underneath everything, somewhere in the part of him that still had his father's spine and his mother's dignity, however deeply buried, he knew he had earned it. After the vote is recorded, Arthur speaks once more. "One final item," he says. "This is not a formal board matter. This is personal. I am telling you this publicly because it was done publicly, by implication, every time this family appeared before you and presented itself as something it was not." He looks at Lily, who is standing beside him with her small hand still in his, looking at the room with those large dark eyes. She is not afraid. She is something more interesting than unafraid. She is calm. The calm of someone who has weathered something genuinely difficult and found out they are stronger than the weather. "My estate has been restructured," Arthur says. "My will, executed 3 weeks ago, transfers my controlling interest in Calloway Group and the primary assets of my estate to Lily Chen Calloway, held in trust until she is 25 years old and managed by a board of trustees that includes her mother, her legal counsel, and the corporate leadership of this company. The values of this company were built on the principle that substance matters more than image, that people matter more than appearances, that you look after your own." He pauses. "Lily is my own," he says, "and I look after my own, no exceptions." He clicks off the microphone. He hands it back to the event coordinator. And then he kneels down right there in the center of the ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel with 400 people watching and photographers clicking and Vanessa's social media coordinator sitting in a side room watching the feed with her mouth open. And he looks at Lily and he says quietly enough that only she can hear it, "Ready to go?" Lily looks at him. She looks at the room. She looks at her father, who has still not spoken, who is standing near the stage with his hands at his sides and his face a study in a reckoning that is long overdue. "Yes," she says. She does not look at Richard on the way out. She doesn't ignore him either. She simply walks with her grandfather through the center of the room, past 400 people who part for them like water, and out through the doors at the back. Outside, in the cool night air of the hotel entrance where a car is waiting, Arthur stops and looks down at Lily. "How are you doing?" he asks. Lily thinks about this with her characteristic seriousness. "Okay," she says. "A little tired." "Me too," Arthur says. They get in the car. The driver closes the door. The Meridian Grand Hotel, with all 400 of its guests and all its photographers and all its family legacy banners, recedes behind them. Inside the car, Lily leans her head against Arthur's arm. He doesn't say anything. He just lets her. And they drive home. Now, you might be wondering what happened next, and I'll tell you because the story doesn't end in a hotel ballroom. Mei Chen came home from the hospital 6 weeks later. She was not fully recovered, and recovery would be an ongoing process, but she was well enough to come home to the apartment that Arthur had quietly arranged in a better neighborhood with better medical facilities nearby, paid for through the trust he had established for Lily. Lily was there when May walked in, and the reunion was not dramatic in the way that reunions are in movies. It was quiet and fierce and entirely private, mother and daughter holding each other in a hallway. And Arthur waited in the car outside because that moment belonged to them entirely. Lily went back to living with May. This had always been the plan. May was her mother, May was her home. But now Lily also had Saturday afternoons in a garden with rose bushes planted one by one over 12 years and chess games. She was already winning 4 out of 5, and a grandfather who remembered the names of all the people who worked for him and came from Ohio with $47 and had never once, not for one day of his life, forgotten where he came from. Richard Calloway retained his defined settlement. He did not fight the estate changes on the advice of his lawyers, who told him that the documentation was airtight. Arthur's capacity was unquestioned, and any public legal challenge would result in further exposure of the letter and the circumstances surrounding Lily's abandonment. He and Vanessa relocated to a different city. Vanessa's social media platforms went quiet for about 3 months, and then resumed, somewhat more subdued, with notably fewer references to family and legacy. Sandra Okafor became chief executive of Calloway Group, not just on an interim basis but permanently, appointed by the board at a formal general meeting 8 months later. Under her leadership, the company's growth rate climbed to 8.4% in the first year, which was the highest it had been in a decade. Several of the senior creative leaders who had left under Richard quietly reached out to see about coming back. 2 of them did. And Lily, 7-year-old Lily Chen Calloway, with her red coat and her suspension bridge made of books and her scar that tells a story of trying to help someone she loved. Lily continued going to school, where she remained best friends with Priya, who loved dinosaurs. She visited Arthur every second weekend and most of the school holidays. She was, by every account of everyone who knew her, happy. Genuinely, quietly, solidly happy in the way that children are when they feel safe. She asked Arthur once, about a year after the gala, when they were sitting in the garden in the early spring, whether he thought her father would ever apologize. She asked it the way she asked most things, directly, without drama, genuinely wanting to know. Arthur thought about the question for a long time, long enough that Lily looked at him twice to check he had heard her. I don't know, Arthur said finally. Some people never get there. It requires a kind of honesty with yourself that not everyone can manage. Lily considered this. Do you think he's sorry? I think he's sorry about what happened to him, Arthur said carefully. Whether he's sorry about what happened to you is a different question. Lily nodded slowly. My mom says that waiting for someone to apologize is like waiting for rain in a drought, she said. You're better off figuring out how to water your own garden. Arthur looked at his granddaughter. Your mother, he said, is a very wise woman. I know, said Lily. Same as always. Simple. Complete. And now I want to talk to you for a moment, because this story is not really about money. I know it looks like it's about money. $2 billion, controlling shares, estate documents, board votes. But strip all of that away, and what you have left is something much simpler and much older. A child in the rain, a man who knelt down, a family that was built not on blood and inheritance, but on the decision to show up, to look at a small person who needed to be seen, and to say yes. Yes, of course, you are mine and I am yours, and that is how this works. Richard and Vanessa had everything. The house, the brand, the followers, the perfect photographs, the events with 400 guests who applauded at the right moments. They had the performance of a life, and they threw away the real thing. They looked at a child, their own child, a 7-year-old, with dark eyes and a burn scar and a suspension bridge made of books, and they calculated that she was a liability to the narrative they were selling. And here's the darkest irony, the sharpest one, the one that will sit with you after this video ends. The image they were protecting, it is gone. the brand they built, altered beyond recognition, the narrative they worked so hard to maintain. Written by Arthur in a hotel ballroom, in front of 400 witnesses in a room full of cameras. They protected the performance and lost the substance, and in doing so, they lost the performance too. And Lily? Lily is fine. Lily is better than fine. Lily has a mother who loves her, and a grandfather who kneels down in the rain, and a red coat in a chess game she's winning, and a whole life ahead of her, funded and secured and legally irrevocable, built on the only currency that actually holds its value over time, the decision to look after your own. No exceptions. I have one question for you before you go. Think about the people in your life who show up quietly, without needing credit, without needing an audience. The people who kneel down in the rain. Are you telling them what they mean to you? Leave me a comment below with the word legacy, if this story hit you the way I think it did. Tell me which part moved you most, and if you want to hear another story about justice finding its way to the right people, the next video is right there. Don't go anywhere.